I see like 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds drinking Coca-Cola. You wouldn't give them cigarettes, don't give them sugar. Parents have to be informed. If they have a disorder, try eating this way and see if it goes away.
I'm absolutely delighted to have Gary Taubes join us in this episode of Inspiring Better Health. Gary, over the years, has written so many inspiring books. He's an investigative journalist who has specialized in the history of health, the history of medication. And in this book, he looks at over 100 years of diabetes and the different things we've used to treat it, and come to a conclusion at the end, which you'll find out in the podcast, of the best way to deal with type 2 diabetes. We recorded this episode at the Public Health Collaboration, where Gary flew over to be our keynote speaker. Mid-transatlantic, he caught quite a severe ear infection, but he still turned up. Coincidentally, before we gave his speech, we gave him this year's Lifetime Achiever Award for his contribution to the world of health. And how befitting that was, because despite his ear infection, he gave one of the most amazing speeches that I have heard live on stage. And despite his ear infection, he still gave us this interview, which I really hope you're going to enjoy.
Imagine patients being treated, and I'm going to say this on the panel, but I'll say it now. So a patient gets diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is insulin dependent, so we're going to leave that out right now. They get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and you say to them, we have two levers we can pull. You have drugs and you have diet. And you can do them both. If we put you on drugs, and we can do that, we have great drugs, and we have better drugs every year, and there are new drugs coming down the pipeline. These drugs, you're going to lose weight, you're going to have, great, we're going to keep your blood sugar under control. There are all these complications that are going to happen. They might happen anyway. Okay, so you may go blind, you may have nerve damage, and you might have some of your limbs amputated, and you may die 5-7 years earlier than otherwise. But the drugs will be great, and you could eat anything you want. Or you could eat this diet, and you'll be fine. Your choice. Thank you.
This man needs no introduction. Gary Taubes, you're a legend in our space, probably in every space.
Just ours, actually.
And, for those that don't know, Gary, and this is the only thing I don't like about you, your career, because I can never say the word investigative journalist. I just did it, investigative journalist. That's better. You wrote your first book. In the UK, we have a different title for it. I'll put it in because it's Good Calories, Bad Calories in the UK, but in America, I think it was called something different.
No, in the US, it's Good Calories, Bad Calories. In the UK, it's the Diet Delusion.
Right. Okay.
They were working off the God Delusion.
Right. Was that for what reason? Was it a different title?
It's just the publishers. These are one of the mysteries of the publishing industry.
You get two titles for one. That's great.
It's a little, occasionally you have people on Amazon go, buy both. And they're outraged. But,
so you've been, for a couple of decades now, telling the truth and uncovering the truth about the evolution of diets, from right back from Banting to then how Ansel Keys got involved and changed the shape of diets. Your new book is brilliant about looking at the history of diabetes and how in the early days they knew it was all about diet. Then drugs got involved, and everybody was, certainly for type 2, we're using drugs, almost ignoring the diet. And then you were singing the praises earlier on of some brilliant doctors, including our own beloved David Unwin. Why do we keep screwing things up? Why don't we learn from history 100 years ago? And why do we, in terms of diet and treatments, why do we keep messing things up?
Doctors make decisions on very limited evidence. So you're treating patients, you've got these decisions you have to make of life and death. The decisions that are made early in a disease history tend to have a lot of staying power. There's only a few doctors in the field who are paying attention, and these are the physicians who know the least about the disease. So decisions are made 1921, 22, when insulin is discovered and insulin therapy is first used. And so you start shaping your understanding of the disease. You start making the decisions about how to treat it and how to balance drug versus diet, because it's different for everyone. And what the physicians don't realize as they make these decisions is that they think that they're tentative. They think, okay, as new information comes in, I'm going to change the way I think, but nobody does. And so what happens is over the course of the century that follows, you learn all these new, you learn that virtually, it's a cliche, virtually everything you thought you knew about the disease was wrong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change therapy. There's no point where you say to yourself, like 1960, when technology comes in that allows them to measure hormones in the blood, and now for the first time ever, you realize that type 2 diabetes, which is 90 to 95% of all cases, is not a disease of insulin deficiency, but of excess insulin and insulin resistance. But when that happens, even that knowledge takes like 15 years to go from the initial paper published to sort of disseminate through the research community, let alone the medical community, and arguably 25 years before doctors begin to really grapple with the implications. And at no point does a doctor say to himself, well, I've had this patient on insulin for 10 years, thinking I was treating an insulin deficiency disease. Now that I know that I'm treating an insulin excess disease, I'm going to change my therapy. It just doesn't. If a new drug comes in, we have all these mechanisms at work to get the drug, the paper in the right journals, and people say we have a new drug like these GLP-1 agonists for obesity, and they spread everywhere because it's so effective. But there's no method to disseminate sort of new understanding of the disease that might affect treatment. And the medical organizations, like the American Diabetes Association, the British Diabetes Foundation, they have no mechanism by which to say, to do what I did, in effect, say, wait a minute, we're 100 years in here. We've got this rampant diabetes epidemic. We've made zero progress again. It's after 100 years, despite all this amazing drug and devices we keep creating, diabetes is still seen as a chronic progressive disease. Maybe we're approaching this the wrong way. Like maybe we should rethink our approach. If this was an industry, a company that board would say, you're really underproducing here. Like you're doing a lousy job of this. So we're going to bring in these consultants. In the US, it's like we're going to bring in McKinsey.
Yeah.
And McKinsey's going to pour through everything, and they're not going to care anything. They're going to treat your product like widgets. And at the end of the McKinsey report, they're going to tell us who's got to get fired, what we got to do, what new programs we got to put in, what we got to stop selling, what we got to start selling, reshape everything because you're underperforming. You're doing a lousy job.
Yeah.
There's no mechanism like that. In the medical community, these associations don't have, the National Health Service doesn't have, and nobody stops and says, let's bring in some outsiders and figure out how we, screwed up.
Yeah, you said it brilliantly earlier on as well. You just nailed it when you said that type 2 diabetes, type 1 obviously very different, but type 2 is a problem with dealing with carbohydrates. So anybody that says, add more carbohydrates and then just medicate your way out, it's just complete nonsense.
It is complete nonsense, but dietitians are taught that carbohydrates are essential. The brain prefers to use carbohydrates as preferred fuel, which is not true. It's just the fuel you use if you're eating a carbohydrate-rich diet. The brain's not making judgments like that. As you go along, as you learn all these new things, dogmas and belief systems tend to reinforce themselves.
Yeah.
So they accumulate beliefs that support them. So one of them is like, nobody wants to be on a diet anyway. So why are we even talking about it? We're going to tell people to go on diets, but they're not going to listen to us. So then we have to treat them with drugs with the assumption that they're not going to listen to us anyway. We don't think that if you treat them with insulin, remember you've got type 2 diabetes as an insulin resistant, insulin excess disorder. Now we're going to give them more insulin. They got to eat carbohydrates, okay? Because when your insulin levels are high, carbohydrates are your fuel. That's what your body stores fat, takes protein and repurposes to make sure it's used for muscles and tissues, and basically burns carbs as fuel. The insulin tells your mitochondria to burn carbohydrates, so you need carbs. So as long as you're giving insulin, you've got to feed carbs.
Yeah.
So yeah, insulin's essential if you're on insulin therapy. I mean, carbohydrates are essential if you're on insulin therapy. And again, if you do rethink, like David Unwin rethought, then you become an outsider. You're no longer, it's like somebody who's a member of a church deciding God doesn't exist. And it's like if you're the pastor of that church, you don't continue being the pastor, right? You're out.
Yeah.
You're looking in the windows, but you're not sitting in the pews anymore. And then this is what happens in nutrition also. If you shift your thinking so it's now contrary to how everyone else thinks, you're in effect, you're excommunicated. You're outside looking in, and now you join people like us who are trying to say, but just try it.
Yeah. Yeah, because we firmly believe, and probably my biggest mission in life is to get everybody to realize that this constellation of diseases, everything from erectile dysfunction to PCOS to the main driver of Alzheimer's to bipolar disease to obviously type 2 diabetes, obesity, certain cancers, it's the insulin that links them all together. So when we get elevated insulin, it is the elevated insulin that is the core driver. And I was working with Benjamin Bickman, who you know very well, and I came up with this tree. So I went, look, there's these root causes, mainly carbohydrates, too much sugar, a few other little root causes, sedentary lifestyles, not sleeping properly, stress, but mainly diet. In the trunk of the tree is insulin resistance, but then the branches are all these constellations of disease that are all driven by too much insulin. And then about 6 months after I put this tree out on social media and various places, Swiss Re, a big life insurance company in Europe, just completely copied my tree, which at first I thought, it's a bit rude without asking. But then I thought, that's fantastic, because if a life insurance company whose job is to keep you alive for longer are saying, yes, it's all linked to insulin resistance, maybe we've gone in a different angle now rather than relying just on the doctors to get this message across. And so it's starting to get out there. But the other interesting thing, isn't it? They go, science only progresses one funeral at a time. Yeah. I think you probably even wrote that. But
it's attributed to Max Planck, the physicist. But it's a paraphrasing, I think, how he phrased it. But once nobody changes how they think. It's funny, I get in trouble for saying this because I'll acknowledge, like, now that I've shifted my thinking, I'm not going back. They say, well, are you saying there's no evidence that can make you going back? And it's going to be tough. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to die off if I'm wrong and just, But nobody shifts their thinking. They just don't. Belief systems are very, it's because you're invested in the belief system. You're invested in how you thought. You're invested in your friends all think the way you think.
But that must be really frustrating for you. You've dedicated the vast majority of your life to uncover the truth and done all this research and you've just shown where we went wrong on the dietary path, where we went wrong on the diabetes path, and you've shown even where the roads diversified from the original thinking, and now you've shown us all that. Is that not then frustrating if people aren't listening?
Well, you just have to keep your expectations low. That's the secret in life. I mean, it's literally, I've said this to journalists, because if somebody's writing about my work, the easiest way to do it is you interview me, and then you Google, and it takes about 5 minutes to find people who think I'm an idiot, and you interview them, and they're establishment scientists, because I'm implying that they're wrong. Not only am I implying that they're wrong, that their whole career has been basically wasted because they've been pursuing misconceived ideas, and they should have done what I did, and come to my conclusions when they started. And so it's very easy to find people who will say I'm an idiot. So then you write up your piece. Taubes has this interesting idea. Here are these 3 leading authorities. You say he's an idiot. Let's move on. The other way to do it is to ask me, because I'm going to say, look, those 3 guys never read my books because they know I'm wrong. Okay? So they see no reason to read my books because it is clear to them, what you have to do is interview people who have read my books, who thought I was wrong, and now don't.
Yeah.
That's the signal.
Yeah.
That's the interesting interview. So let me give you the names of those people, and they're also very prestigious, respected people. Mm-hmm. And they've actually taken the time, because they're open-minded and curious, and they thought, well, I think this guy's an idiot, but let's actually read his book and find out. And then they read the book and decided I wasn't, or at least not entirely. So those are the people you talk to. So the people, we're making progress. See, not because we're changing minds intellectually, but because we're making people healthy. Mm-hmm. So like this, is an amazing get-together.
Yeah.
Okay, so 500 people in this room, the Public Health Consortium. I mean, it's amazing what Sam Feltham has done.
Yeah.
And the world is very slowly changing. It always starts small, and it stays small for a very long time. And then the question is, will we get to some point where it tips and goes from, this incremental day-to-day increase in people who pay attention to, going viral. And I don't know if we'll get there or not, because there's all these contrary forces at work in the world as well.
Would you be, with those contrary forces, talking about big pharmaceutical, big food industry, that the big food industry is predominantly carbohydrates. It's the smaller farmers that make the meat and make and grow the vegetables. Certainly here in the UK. So would you be saying that what's stopping the message getting out?
Well, that's
beyond people not changing their mind and dying with their hypotheses, is that there's so much money to be made by keeping people, just taking the drugs and eat what you like.
Pretty much. So yeah, it's the drugs, the food industry, the climate change implications of eating this way, the ethical implications of eating animals. At least in the United States, as the left, my people have moved further and further to the left and embraced mostly plant eating, then that's based on a belief system that's sort of contrary to ours. Even if these people don't realize it, it emerges from a belief system about the dangers of meat consumption, saturated fat, all being bad for the health. So with the way we eat to be healthy is contrary to the way they believe they have to eat to be, sort of ethical. Yeah. And for the good of the environment and all these other issues.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about vegetarian diets in my new book. I've even said, look, if you want to have a vegetarian diet, that's fine, but do it knowing the three things that for health, it isn't really the right diet for the human body. From an animal welfare point of view, well, for every one cow will sustain a human for a year, and yet thousands die as we bulldoze the fields, and not cows dying, but other animals are dying, thousands to one. So that argument, just be aware of that. If you want to save the one cow, but all the little bunny rabbits and all the other things don't matter to you, then that's absolutely fine, but understand that. So the health one goes away. And then you look at the environmental one, and of course, the cows have been around a long time. It isn't the cows that are really causing the problem. Yes, they, no matter what we do with them, make them eat garlic or whatever, they're still going to be putting some methane out. But come on, that can't be the real issue for global warming.
All of that is true, but
as long as they know the facts,
very smart, thoughtful people disagree with us.
Yeah,
and it's that's an infectious way to think in this modern world. Or, one way I try to phrase it in dealing, because I often think myself, like, let's say they're right, and do I have a right to be healthy, to use animals for my own purposes and have them slaughtered and eat them? I would never do it myself. If I ever went to I acknowledge that if I went to a slaughterhouse, it would push me towards vegetarianism. But what if it was my kids? Don't I have a moral obligation to feed my kids the healthiest possible diet? If my kids struggle with weight and blood sugar control, as more and more and more and more children do in each generation, just the act of having children means I have a moral obligation to feed them in a way that makes them as healthy as possible. That's something I believe. And so if you may believe that the mostly plant or vegetarian or vegan diet is the most ethical way to eat, but if you're doing your children harm by feeding them that diet, does it remain ethical? And these are questions, philosophers can argue over for generations, but that's where I kind of draw the line. So if nothing else, I have to feed my children the healthiest possible diet. Although there's a whole world of people who think that feeding them bacon is not a good idea.
Yeah. And it's a challenge, I mean, I'm in this space day in, day out. I've gone from being obese to in reasonably good shape, and I've seen the light, but it's still, and I've got young children, it's still a challenge because I can't sit here and say to you there isn't a single cereal box in my house, because there is. And while I try to make sure they don't have it more than now and again, by complete abstinence in our house, my wife is convinced that they will just, when they move out, go completely the opposite way. So it's just a challenge, parenting in this.
Children are always I say I'm not the only one who shops or feeds the children in my house. So the cereal boxes and the drawer of chip bags, not, Fritos, not French fry chips. What do you call chips here?
Oh, crisps. Crisps, yeah.
It's like, why are there just get 9 bags in here?
Well, it's all right as long as it's still 9 tomorrow.
Half of them have been opened, and, there's just...
it's a challenge.
But it's not so... It's always a compromise.
Yeah.
But,
and it's a challenge because you and I were talking earlier on about our respective sports that we love. We talked about Ronaldo and, David Beckham. I idolise David Beckham. I think he's done a great thing for football, what you'd call soccer. But now he's putting his face on crisps, chips, adverts, and it just drives me mad. You don't need the money. He knows they're shit. He knows they're unhealthy, and yet he's selling his soul out now. I don't know for what reason, maybe to keep the fame going or a little bit more money, who knows? But and that is the problem. The kids go, how on earth, dad, writer, author, how could you be right if David Beckham's saying we should be eating crisps? I mean, it's just, that's the nonsense we've got to deal with, eh?
It's an interesting problem because the food industry will always have the money to pay enormous sums to celebrities and athletic stars to advertise their products. And, occasionally you get pushback. Where you were describing that, I was thinking of in the U.S. where it's the Coca-Cola and the PepsiCo ads. With, how much money does an athlete need before he says no to sugary beverages that are being sold to populations that are particularly susceptible to metabolic diseases? And over the years, there have been people who have raised money for nonprofits to create advertisements fighting back against sugar consumption, sugary beverages, and ultra-processed food. But they don't have a bottomless well of cash to spend like the food industry does. They come and they go and they pass, and their stuff stays on YouTube, and then it becomes ancient history, and then somebody else has to do it. It's just it's just the way the world is.
How do we change it? How do we change it? Do we keep pushing the governments to prove beyond doubt that sugar is addictive, causing problems, and get an advertising ban like we did on cigarettes? I mean, Formula One used to have cigarette Marlboro all over them, but they've done a real great job, governments have, of eradicating all the marketing and advertising on cigarettes. Do we do the same? I mean, in Chile, they now put warnings on all the cereal boxes.
I think you have to just get the information out. And with sugar, I actually think we're winning that battle. Actually, on some level with carbs in general, too. The meme that carbs are fattening is back. It vanished for a while, but now it's back. It's not... some people choose not to believe it, but they hear it everywhere. You see it on TV shows, characters. I was watching a Danish show, cop show, and one of the characters offered a Coke, and he said, I don't do sugar,
That's
so
good.
It's out there.
Yeah.
You just have to I think that's the first battle. I'm not a big fan of government regulation because I think they'll screw it up if given any opportunity. I mean, again, with the influence of the mostly plant, vegetarian, vegan movement, they'll ban meat and butter before they'll go after sugar. I actually had this conversation with one of the leading proponents of plant-based diets in the U.S., very funny guy, and he said, why did you never get behind me when I was pushing this our sugar bill, our anti-sugar bill? And I said, because I know that as soon as you get sugar regulated, you'll go after my pastrami. And he said, you're damn right I will. It's like...
So ground up then, not regulatory, not governments,
but
ground up.
as long as everybody knows.
Yeah.
And people don't, and it doesn't trickle down to certain, you see people, subways in the U.S., and I see like 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds drinking Coca-Cola, and I think parents have to be informed. They have to know that this isn't just, it's very easy to raise your kids on sweets, but you're doing them metabolic damage for the rest of their life. You might as well, it's like you wouldn't give them cigarettes, don't give them sugar. And again, it's a slow battle to win, and governments don't want to go there. They'll set sort of maximum amounts of like 10% of the diet max should be sugar, as opposed to saying, don't eat this stuff, it's toxic. Nobody tells us to smoke 5 cigarettes a day.
Cut back on
no
sugar.
more than 5, but 5 is good. Go for it. And just say, look, cigarettes will kill you, so don't smoke. And then eventually, I doubt we'll get there with sugar, but we can try. And
I mean, back to the cans of Coke for a second. There are pieces of research in South America that just the sugared beverages, as in the Cokes, the fizzy pops, just that alone, they've got the evidence of how much it shortens life before we even look at anything else. Here's one for you. You're in London. So we calculated, and this figure sounds so ridiculous, we had to get an army of accountants to check this figure. So cans of Coke, or the equivalent of the 330 ml can, the amount sold globally in one day, the sugar, if you weighed that sugar and converted that to the weight of London buses, because we're in London, how many London buses in weight do you think is sugar in cans of just Coke, so one of the brands, just one of their drinks consumed every day?
Let's see. I'm going to say 15 million.
Ooh, big number. So if you took 3,000 London buses, 3,000 London buses, and took the weight of that, because I was trying to visualize it. I thought it was going to be 4 or 5, but it was 3,000. And you still can't visualize what 3,000 double-decker London buses look like. So we said if you put them nose to tail, it's 20 miles long. That's the weight of sugar added to just one drink in one day. It's frightening. It's frightening. It really is terrible.
It's a terrific substance.
Yeah.
And I'd say actually, my book, The Case Against Sugar, and I started out, I remember when I was thinking about this, and I thought, I just can't use this because it's too prejudicial. That's what a trial judge would say if this was a legal case. Imagine if sugar was a drug, like heroin. So it's a drug, but it doesn't have any...
Which it is, by the way.
Huh?
Which it is, by the way.
It could be, yeah. And it doesn't have chronic effects. So, it doesn't have acute effects. So it's like you don't get overdose, you don't die from it, you don't get shaked or jittery or pass out. But it makes you very happy. It makes kids very happy. And because it doesn't have these sort of immediate effects of other drugs of abuse, parents could give it to their kids. So imagine that heroin was basically benign. So it had long-term chronic effects, and you didn't have to inject it, you could just eat it.
Yep.
And so parents give it to the kid at like his first birthday or her first birthday, and the kid is like ecstatic. There are YouTube videos about kids tasting ice cream cones for the first time, and they're like, give me that. And then you realize that anytime the kid is disturbed or angry or anxious or scared or frightened, you can give them sugar.
Yeah.
And if you want to resist giving them sugar, grandparents can always give them sugar for you to make sure that the kids want to go to grandma's house, right? Because if I go to grandma's house, I will get this drug. And then when they play games, sporting events, we're going to get them to the games by giving them the drug, and we're going to give them the drug before the games because that'll help them through the games. And then my oldest son, I apologize for saying this on YouTube, used to go, wasn't an athlete, but he'd go to the soccer games because at the end of the games, they got apple juice and cookies, which I wouldn't give him at home. So the 7-year-old boy would put up with an hour of being tortured on the football pitch because at the end of it, he'd get apple juice and cookies. I mean, this is how powerful the drug is. And then you'd give it to him. Every holiday is going to become about giving them the drug. So Christmas cookies, Easter, sweets, cakes, Valentine's Day chocolates, birthdays, birthday cakes. It's always going to be part of every. And graduations, it's like, I'm going to bake you a cake. It's how we're going to communicate love, right?
Yeah.
It's not flowers and sweets.
Yeah.
You know, diamonds and sweets. It's always going to be the sweets. It's part of it. So because it's a drug that doesn't do acute damage, it only does chronic damage. And by the time it does chronic damage, you've had the entire population taking this drug. So cigarettes, you could always compare smokers to non-smokers. You never got more than half. But in the population, I mean, you don't start kids on cigarettes when they're 1 year old, but you can start them on this other drug when they're 1 year old.
Yeah.
Right? So by the time that you're looking to see what's causing the chronic disease, you've got the entire population doing the same thing. You can't compare sugar consumers to non-consumers. Or if you can, the non-consumers are like health nuts, wackos. So they're doing all kinds of things. It's just, and you can imagine this thought experiment. And it's like, well, wait a minute, but that is the world we live in today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is this why? I think so, but I can't prove it.
Yeah, well, I mean, yesterday we had a conference, and it was the International Food Addiction Consensus Conference. 200 to 300 experts in the room, doctors, nutritionists, a lot of eating disorder doctors. Brilliant doctor, Dr. Ali Ibrahim was with us, discussing how addictive sugar and certainly ultra-processed food is. And the consensus was it fits all the ways you would describe a addiction perfectly. I mean, there isn't anything that sugar doesn't fit in terms of the addiction profile. But like you say, when the whole world's addicted to it, it doesn't make it right, but you've got to swim against the tide.
I was writing a piece that was originally for the New York Times Magazine about whether or not obesity is caused by eating too much or whether it's a hormonal carbohydrate insulin disorder. So when I first did my first piece for the New York Times Magazine in 2002 on this, so what if it's all been a big fat lie, this infamous piece, a lot of the researchers said I had conned them, I had interviewed them, and then I went out and wrote this pro-Atkins piece as though I knew that I was going to write the pro-Atkins piece in advance. So this time I thought, I'm not going to fool them. I'm going to tell them exactly what I'm doing. There's a famous article that was written in 1961 by a president of the Endocrine Society in the U.S., a guy named Astwood. And Astwood was called The Heritage of Corpulence. And in this article, he explains that obesity isn't caused by eating too much. It's almost assuredly a hormonal issue about fat storage and fat oxidation, all these enzymes and the physiological phenomena that regulate these things. And you can easily imagine how somebody could be dysregulated such that they accumulate so much fat and then they're hungry all the time, and then doctors tell them they shouldn't eat, and it makes them even hungrier, and that creates all the psychological problems. But it all starts with this fat dysregulation. So I send these people out the emails, And I say what I'm arguing is whatever happened to this argument of Astwood's, that it's not eating too much. It's a hormonal issue. And I include the Astwood article. And I'm sending this to a whole world of people who believe that we get fat because we eat too much. Genetic reasons, but they all make us eat too much. And most of these people respond to me and they say, I agree completely with the Astwood article. And I want to say, no, you don't. You completely disagree with it. That's why I showed it to you. But when they read it, whatever they read, they agreed with. Like we had entirely different perspectives. We read the same article and came away with entirely different messages based on what we brought to it.
Yeah.
More so than what was actually in it.
Yeah.
And it's just the way the world works. People's perspectives completely determine, on some large extent, how they see the world. What they see is determined as much by what's inside as what's outside. And if you don't understand that, you can't get them to see things differently. You can't anyway. They still have to die off. But.
So what you see, what you hear, so people are watching you, listening to you now, give us, from all the years you've been researching, your 3 biggest takeaways on how to live healthily.
Avoid sugar. If you're on this spectrum of overweight, obese, pre-diabetic to diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and metabolic dysregulated, then you might want to avoid all carbohydrate-rich foods. So I'm going to say, okay, sugar, refined carbs, ultra-processed carbohydrates primarily. If you get rid of those, then you're getting rid of whatever the oils might do that come with them. And then so now you're eating whole foods, no sugar, and then if you have a weight problem or a blood sugar problem or a hypertension, blood pressure problem, then you might want to avoid all carb-rich foods, and now you're moving into keto land. And that would pretty much cover it.
Brilliant. I mean, you look super healthy. What's your diet routine?
Pretty much that.
Yeah.
The easiest way, I don't eat starches and sugars anymore. I don't feel good and they make me fat. And I don't like to think of it as intermittent fasting, but I don't eat breakfast anymore because I tend to be more alert, think more clearly if I don't eat in the mornings. And so I eat a lot of green leafy vegetables and, regrettably for the animals, a lot of animal products.
Brilliant. And that's very much my diet, with a lot of fiber first, because if I do have carbs, I don't process them very well at all. So if I do have to let me rephrase that. You don't have to have carbs at any time, but if the family are cooking something and I want to join in, then I have a bit of fiber first, and that just slows down the release of those carbs. And what I'm pushing is that the diet you just described, I think, is probably what us humans are meant to eat. Leafy greens, some diversification of vegetables, nuts, seeds, and some animal products. But what we're finding is that 2/3 of the UK, by the way, go on a diet every year, 2/3, and statistically only 1% are successful. So 99% fail. And what we've been doing some research on is we've said, why do they fail? And that is the brain doesn't normally like giving things up. So what we did a lot of research on was, well, what happens if we make them eat a load of fiber first? Because you don't digest the fiber, it lines the bottom of the stomach, then slows down the absorption of whatever you eat. And we do it, put loads of people on CGMs and sort of get the data and prove it. So we start the diet by actually getting them not to drop anything, but actually eat more. So we get them eating some fiber, some nuts, some chia seeds before they eat, or avocado, or fiber drink, or whatever. And that fills them up, and they don't eat so much. And then all of a sudden, because now they're not driven by hunger, they start to change their dietary to the right food choices. That's what we're working on at the moment.
It's also a question to me of do you have a disorder or symptom that you wish, you would like to resolve, put into remission, whatever it is? Is it obesity? Is it diabetes? Is it manic bipolar disorder? Is it, and that's a different issue. So if you're healthy, real food can't go wrong on some level. That's a reasonable bet. Maximize your life. You might be able to live a little longer if you don't eat this or you do eat that, but there's no way to tell. So let's start with real food and not processed, which leaves out sugar. So, but if you're not healthy, now it becomes on some level a process of self-experimentation. And your scenario of the vegetarians and the carnivores on stage together. In my book, The Case for Keto, I discussed how different doctors approach this, and I had a chapter where I had quotes from many of the people I interviewed. Ken Berry had a couple because he's so quotable. But one of them was, it's not a religion, it's just about how I feel. And it was this spine surgeon in Ohio named Gary Taubes, who type 1 diabetes, I think it's type 1, eventually moved into a vegan keto diet because she can't tolerate animal products. And I put her in the same chapter with Georgia Ede, who's now very well known because of her book, and Georgia moved to a carnivore diet because she couldn't tolerate plant products. In neither case was it any desire to consume an extreme diet. You just go to the point at which your symptoms resolve. If your symptoms resolve on the whole food diet, then you're fine. Why go beyond it? If they don't, those symptoms could be, say, 20 pounds of overweight, or, some people, it's like 10 pounds of overweight, and I don't know if any diet's going to make a difference at 10 pounds after a certain age, but it's a sort of, you just keep experimenting until you find the point at which they go away, and then you decide, is it worth it? A very good friend of mine was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I'm trying to convince her that she should do keto, and her husband is saying, but she loves to eat. And so, first of all, you can love to eat and do keto. I get by that you mean she loves carbs. But if she goes 3 months without them and the symptoms of the Parkinson's resolve, she might decide it's worth it. Loving to eat, she could love to eat different foods and not have Parkinson's. So it's a process of self-experimentation. And often when I'm talking to physicians, researchers in the world of conventional thinking, if they have a disorder, I think I have something we can work with.
Yeah.
Try eating this way and see if it goes away. If it does, I'm going to have an ally. If it doesn't, and often it doesn't because either it doesn't work, period, or because they're so biased that the sort of anti-placebo effect prevents it from working, who knows?
Yeah.
Or they never really put their heart into it. I often have to say, look, don't just eat this way, but do it right.
Yeah.
Okay? So don't say I'm doing keto and then you had potatoes with your meal because you like potatoes. Just don't eat 3 months. Give me 3 months. Or 2 months. At the end of 2 months, if your Parkinson's is better, if your bipolar disorder is better, you might decide it's worth it.
Yeah.
To never again eat a piece of bread.
Yeah. Brilliant advice. Look, I've taken up way too much of your time. It's been brilliant. Thank you very much for it and all the work you do and coming all the way to the UK for our conference. It's great. Lovely having you here.
Thank you, Steve.
Truly appreciate it, mate.